Okay, here we discuss Chapter 11, which is about managing conflict. And there are a lot of things that we cover in this chapter. One of the first of which is a simple definition. And the most common definition comes from Hawker and Wilmot. And basically, you have the notion that conflict is an express struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving those goals. It's important to break down the different components of that definition. The idea of an express struggle, there has to be awareness. If somebody flips you off behind your back, that's not considered conflict because you're not aware of it. Perceived incompatible goals. The key word there is perceived. The incompatible goals don't have to be real. It is simply a perception of incompatible goals. When you think that you and your best friend are applying for a single job and you think it's that way, and then it turns out that they are hiring two people, and so your perception was wrong, but if you perceive it to be so, then it can create conflict. Scarce rewards, there's not enough of something to go around, for example, the job scenario. Interdependence, that's probably the most critical aspect of the definition, that something that one party does will affect the other. Inevitability, conflict is not automatically a bad thing. We tend to have a very negative stereotype of conflict, but it actually can produce a lot of good things. We just need to learn how to deal with it in a functional manner. So it's important to look at the difference between healthy or functional conflict and dysfunctional conflict. And so we're going to take a look at some of the comparisons. And these are some of the characteristics. Now these are sort of either ends of a continuum. So on the functional side, you have integration, the idea that we're going to work together. On the dysfunctional side, polarization. So all the language is about opposites. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you're evil. And so it's either or versus together, that we will work together. Cooperation, again, the working together, that we are in this together, and that it is through our collaboration that we can work. Opposition, you're the enemy, so why would I want to work with you? Cooperation, again, can lead to disconfirmation, if you remember that from the chapter on communication climate. Confirmation, fairly straightforward in terms of the positive affirmation. Obviously, disconfirmation, it's opposite. Agreement, this is how you come to resolution. That we're gonna both agree. It's not a matter of one party. We have to both agree. Versus coercion, which is I'm gonna get what I want, and if you don't want it, it really doesn't matter. I'm just shove it down your throat. De-escalation, we're going to keep the emotions surrounding this conflict under control. We're going to moderate them. Escalation versus, it starts out with yelling and begins to go on up until the next thing you know, somebody's screaming or throwing something. Focusing has to do with staying on the issue at hand versus drifting, where maybe, okay, we're discussing this maybe a late payment on a house bill that you were supposed to pay your part of, and it is suddenly drifted to the dishes that were left in the sink, to the party that you had over the weekend, to the condition of your room, and it just drifts from subject to subject. That's very dysfunctional. Foresight is the idea of anticipating consequences of getting your way, and possible outcomes and thinking things down the road. Short-sightedness is just simply focusing on the here and now. Different outcomes. If you can deal with conflict in a functional manner, in the way that we just talked about, there are a lot of positive outcomes to that, and you can read some of those here. Negative dysfunction creates a lot of negative ramifications. Those of you who may have grown up in a very negative a household, a home, where conflict was dealt with in a very dysfunctional manner, there are some consequences that you suffer. Typically nobody wants. You're frequently suffering in a negative way beyond the mere today. The relationship is very tenuous. A lot of distrust is built, and many times relationships simply fall apart because there is no resolution. There are different conflict styles, and this is important. Avoidance, if you're a conflict avoider, you just don't want to deal with it, you ignore it, you walk away. and basically nobody wins. Conflict does not get resolved, and so the relationship does not grow. And there's a lot of unhealthy tolerance with avoiders who just sort of put up with it, whether that's related to a low self-esteem or whether they've just defined the relationship as, well, this is just how it goes. Neither party is content, neither party is happy. There is a time and a place when avoidance might actually be a ideal or a sort of the style of choice. And that's if the risk of speaking up is too great. If you speak up, you're likely to get hit. It might be better to avoid. If you speak up and you're going to get fired, it might be better to avoid. So it's not always wrong. Accommodation, a lose-win, one person loses. And so basically you can either roll over so the other person can get what they want. There are times in any relationship that you're going to want to do that because the issue just isn't worth the relationship and it's important to the other person, and so you'll basically take a losing position so that that person can win. It can be very, very valuable. We tend to, in American culture, tend to think, gosh, if I don't win in every situation, it's, you know, a bad thing. And there's a lot of research that says it's not so bad. A competition, obviously, one person wins, one person loses, and it tends to be very self-focused, and the emphasis is on yourself as a winner. Like I said before, it's very much an individualistic American trait. Passive aggression. We're going to deal with direct aggression and passive aggression here. Passive aggression is when you are very subtle about the way that you express your dissatisfaction. For example, you might be just real sarcastic. You just have a real snippy tone. You use guilt trips a lot. You know, all those nonverbals that might go along with it. Crazy making, an interesting term. I definitely encourage you to go back to the textbook and explore that part of the chapter. Direct aggression. This is where things get personal and things get ugly. It becomes a character attack, competence. Obviously, they can attack anything that's irrelevant to the issue in a very abusive and hurtful way. And so it tends to be very destructive for a lot of reasons. A lot of impact, both psychologically and potentially physically. Collaboration is the quote-unquote ideal, your win-win solution, satisfies everybody, and so you're focused on getting the best outcome for yourself and at the same time focusing on a positive outcome for other people. So it's a great thing. It's not always a viable option, but it's a great thing to shoot for. Compromise is a negotiated lose-lose, where basically we both are going to give up something so that we can stop the conflict. We can have a resolution. Neither one of us are 100% happy, but we get something and we've stopped the tension or the conflict. Your book argues that it doesn't deserve its positive image, which is an interesting point of view. I suppose that the ideal is always going to be a win-win, but sometimes that's simply not possible. So again, please remember with these conflict styles, they are all styles and there is a time and place for many of them. It's not like there's only one that is a viable or positive resolution. So which style to use? There's no single right style, and it's important to understand that. So you have a complementary conflict style where you and your partner differ in your style. One person is aggressive, one person is passive. In a symmetrical, they use the same style. Parallel means they shift back and forth. There are times I'll do accommodating, there are times we'll do competition. And so you have these different types: complementary, symmetrical, and complementary. In terms of the spirals, you can create an escalatory and a de-escalatory spiral result. This very much connects with the concepts that we talked about in the last chapter on communication climate. And so it's how you deal with conflict very much affects the social tone of a relationship and can be both very beneficial and very destructive. Toxic conflict. I'll probably show you a video from Gottman that talks about these 4 elements: criticism, defensiveness, and contempt, and stonewalling. So I won't go into it too much right here, but it's a fascinating subject area. Conflict rituals. These are the patterns that we develop. And here you have a typical scenario of one, and so the child has learned to whine in order to get what they want. Some different variables. There are a number of things that influence how you deal with conflict. Culture and gender are probably the most obvious. So we in the U.S. tend to be an assertive culture. You know, if your food has not come to the table the way that you ordered it, you're supposed to say something. Other cultures would not necessarily do that in a direct manner. They would simply push their plate to the side, and that would be enough. They're not going to verbally say it. Not so in American culture. So that's a huge influence. Gender, another. Certainly men more use competition, more likely to use competition than females, and females are more into harmony in the relationship as a whole. In terms of how to manage your conflict, in terms of that practice, there's this 7-step approach that deals with conflict, and definitely recommend you explore that in detail. Okay, so that's it for this chapter, and we'll stop here.